Hello and welcome to Khemia. So, this is like the third time that this visual novel has released, and that makes it like the third revision, I guess. So, if you don't know what Adastra or Khemia is, then let me give you like a really quick refresher, and hopefully it's quick. So, the story starts with actually Echo, and if you recall in the Flint route, they make like a little joke about Captain Amicus, and it's sort of like a Star Trek reference. And eventually that ended up becoming Adastra, the visual novel, which is about Marco the human who was kidnapped by Amicus in order to use him as a sort of like political pawn type thing. But eventually that story um, ends up going through like this whole thing where like Amicus is using Marco as sort of leverage to say like, hey, look, I am as good as my brother who is also using another species as like leverage, saying like, hey, look, I can make peace with these cat alien people, and they're wolves. Amicus is a wolf, um, a Romanesque wolf, and it's this whole thing. It's I guess you could call it like a political visual novel because it kind of is. Um, where Amicus and his brother Cassius are fighting over the throne of Adastra, and Amicus was supposed to become the Emperor of Adastra, but his brother all of a sudden says, like, you know what? I want to become the Emperor instead. So the interim Emperor named Cato um, is like, okay, fine then. You guys get to compete for it. But as it turns out, Cato, Cassius, and Alexios were all conspiring against Amicus to take the emperorship away from him because they thought that he was unfit because he kind of was a bit of a goofball and a bit aloof. He was never really that serious. Despite the fact that a lot of people think like, oh yeah, he's like very good and whatever. Like he was actually kind of childish, and that ends up causing a lot of problems throughout the story where Marco the human, which is the player character, the main character, ends up getting um in a lot of trouble for a lot of Amicus shenanigans and ends up dying not once, but twice because of Amicus. And yes, I said he died twice because the first time he was brought back by the parents, which are these sort of godlike uh, beings. And then the second time he ends up dying trying to save Amicus and trying to save his best friend Nefero, the best friend of the human. And yes, I'm saying best friend because despite the fact that Nefero, who is featured heavily in this visual novel, the sequel, um, ends up um, sleeping with Amicus, despite the fact that Marco and Amicus's relationship at that time was very good. They end up sort of reconciling, and Nefero apologizes for it. It's this whole thing. It's actually a very good visual novel, and I will be linking down in the description to somebody else's video about Ad Astra, where they basically go into great detail about the entirety of the story. Um, like literally, they recount the whole story. um, so yeah, I'll be linking that down in case you want to watch that first before watching this. But like I said, this is the third revision, and one of the reasons for that is actually because around that same time I think Howley was working on Arches, and a lot of what went into Arches actually came out of what was originally going to be in Khemia, the first time around. And I think you'll find that certain little bits and pieces of that are still in this version, but a lot of what Cameron from Arches goes through ends up happening there. It was gonna be talked about in this one. I guess sort of like the overall theme of that visual novel was gonna be part of Khemia, but like it, because Arches took that and then it ended up finishing, Khemia is now needing to be restructured. It doesn't mean that it's probably not gonna talk about that or something similar. Um, but yeah, you can still get some sort of hints as I read. There are some changes that I noticed. But yeah, anyway, so If you've seen, I will leave the older Khemia video up in case you want to look at that one and then look at this one when you're done. But yeah, so. Anywho, so I rambled on enough for 5 minutes. So without further ado, let us begin Khemia. I lay back in the cool blackness of my mind, listening to the voices banter. He must be. I can hear him from here. Are you sure that it's him that you hear? Pretty sure. Dark bluish fur, cream-colored front, ear tips, and muzzle. You just described 500,000 wolves on Adastra. Corrective lenses as well. It's nice. A sort of half-meditation that my mindfulness teacher once taught me several years ago. Thoughts that come unbidden to the mind are not uncommon during meditation, though this time it's quite different. Usually the thoughts don't have a clear purpose, and offer little insight unless one delves into implied and likely non-existent meanings. So what's your explanation? That I'm going crazy? It wouldn't be the first time. No, just that you should be careful when you're trying to reach that far. The mind can often be one massive illusion to its owner, especially concerning non-tangible matters. Now they very much have a purpose, speaking about me. Still, it helps to calm my mind, pull it inward from the outward chaos. It helps me forget the responsibilities that rest upon my shoulders. They mainly rest on my mentor's shoulders, but in turn, he rests upon mine. His mind, it's not sound, it's been altered. That's a common feature for those like you. I frown, feeling as if these voices are being rather rude now, but I try to avoid the distraction. Focus. Instead, I admire the way that I am able to isolate my mind in a place such as this. For many months afterwards, setting foot within these walls or even on campus grounds would fill me with such dread. I simply could not function properly. Now I imagine that incident, a sphere of suffering and shock, to be in a different place in time and space, floating in nothingness. Wowie, I feel it. I feel my focus falter again, hearing what vaguely sounds Khemian, almost like the word for pain. The altered suffix indicates something less solid, more ethereal. See, he hears me. Do not alert him of our presence. So now you believe me. Besides, he is already alert. He's just ignoring us. Like I said, he's gifted. But fine, you can relax. I'll stop. Focus. I instead ponder on why my mind might be thinking of pain, and then imaginary, visceral, and vivid flashes through my mind's eye. Those events are 3 years behind me now. Not only that, but the point in space in which the riots occurred is 1 billion kilometers behind me. That small sphere adrift in time and space. A dark void that I shall never return to. And it continues to move away as our galaxy spins through the ever-expanding universe. The halls of the university are only an illusion of a constant space. Rather, we are at a different point in the universe every moment that we exist, whether that be at home, school, or on a diplomatic mission to Khemia. Therefore, I am free from the moment and that place. Now I am in a clean space, and that's true for every moment that I exist. That's exactly the kind of space that I need to exist in mentally, especially if I want to keep this assignment. The type of assignment that I've wanted my whole life. The exact one if I'd known such an opportunity would exist. A sound mind is one of my most important assets. The past is in the past. And yet, the framing of the space is constant. The marble, the statues, and the lecture halls. These were all here when it happened, and they are here now. So, is it really clean? Stone does not live, therefore it cannot witness. It cannot be corrupted like the minds of sapients. But is that even true? I realize my meditation is veering off course, but it's easy to be distracted when you're lying on a marble bench and your head is beginning to ache. It follows him. I know. My connection is broken by the strange, now ominous thoughts, and I sigh, knowing that I should send a message about this to my mindfulness instructor. But I won't, because my mission is far too close now, and I doubt uncontrolled thoughts will look good in any briefing to my superiors. I begin the process of grounding, rubbing my paws over the cool, polished marble. Have these marble benches and pillars, the facade of the building, witnessed and absorbed the lives that spoke and moved around them before now? If so, then simply distancing myself from a point in space is useless, as the objects most important to that event continue to exist nearby. The idea of buildings possessing a character or consciousness isn't my own. Over a year ago, my instructor in architecture had said that long lasting structures assume identities more distant than the people who built them, especially at times. We witnessed it. We saw you bleed because of them. I open my eyes, my fur bristling and my breath hitching before I hold it, listening. But all I hear are maybe leaves blown in the wind outside, an echo of what the voice had sounded like. I'm disturbed by that voice, much different from the first two that I had been hearing. More worryingly, the thought had been so loud and clear that I thought that it had been spoken by someone until I opened my eyes and found the room empty. In fact, I pinpointed to the statue right in front of me, the one of the spy Antonia, crouching on her pedestal. A strange dark feeling enters my mind as I frown, staring at it. I'd certainly heard something from that direction, like a whisper, and though I try to prevent it, my mind wanders to a more pup-like state. There is no question that this university is filled with unamalgamated spirits, and even in the bright morning light that pours through the windows, Antonia appears eerie to me. Her most famous deed was being an asymptomatic carrier of Lucius fever while a prisoner on Khemia, the outbreak killing hundreds of thousands, a death toll worse for the jackals than any of the battles waged during the war. If any statue is haunted, it is likely hers, and as I move to sit up, she seems to follow me with her gaze. Not just her eyes, but her head as well, and it's so distant that I have to. Scipio! Oh gods! I leap into the air, stumbling away from the sudden voice and movement. Veritas! Why do you shout? Am I shouting? I consider this to be a perfectly reasonable volume. I suppose my advancement in age only continues, and you must learn to live with it. I rub my chest, looking over at the statue as that strange dark feeling slowly dissipates. You did not wait for me at the entrance to the forest this morning, thus my journey was rather dull. You find me all that interesting? I banish the disturbed thoughts from my mind for now, turning my back to the statue of Antonia. Well, I do know that you have managed to capture the full attention of the flower jackal over the past few months. He is most interesting. Yet you insult him in the same breath. Of course that was the reason, considering our conversations always turn towards that jackal. He is a jackal and a flower. What of it? He is a Khemian, and his name is Neferu. Even Khemians have the boundaries of gender. That jackal seems just as happy to be treated as a woman as he is a man. I bite my tongue, feeling the chasm between our differences in age widen just a bit further. Veritas was once thought as a leading social progressive back in the days that Amicus's father, Emperor Potus, ruled. Now with Amicus on the throne, much has changed, and the current emperor is quite popular among wolves in my age demographic. Not so much with Veritas's. As much as I enjoy your conversations on topics such as the latest Khemian fashions and imported amusement tech, I was actually asked by Amicus to discuss a few things with you. I feel a falling feeling in my chest, wondering if I've done something wrong. 2 years ago, Veritas had picked his top 3 students of Khemian history, language, and culture to train and compete to become his assistant and backup for the mission. I had been one of them, and just last week I was officially chosen by both Amicus and Veritas. This despite the fact that I was solidly middling between the other 2 students in our academic marks. Carbo should have been the one to go, able to speak almost unaccented Khemian, and he always knew the answers about Khemian history. I had realized that no matter how much I studied, he would always be ahead. My recent almost desperate attempts to stand out had ended up paying off. When I had been chosen, I was certain that it was a dream, and now I wonder if reality is about to catch up with me. It had probably been clear over the past few years that my mind hasn't always been in the present. Let us discuss this in your studies, Scipio. It is so very close by. I nod and follow, trying to keep my expression neutral so as to avoid embarrassment, no matter which way this discussion leads. Veterus looks over at the stack of books and papers, the bridge of his aged muzzle wrinkling slightly, the graying fur bristling. Honestly, Scipio, how often do I need to tell you that your clutter directly reflects your mind? If you're feeling overwhelmed, cleaning up your workspace is the first step. I wince, and I can't stop the blush from spreading across my own muzzle. We are very different in this regard as well. I'd been to Veterus's residence on a handful of occasions, and while the study was indeed clean, the rest of it was not. Maybe it's a representation of the one aspect of his life that he has in order, having abandoned his personal life before becoming an instructor. My study, which often doubles as my sleeping quarters after being selected 2 years previously, is one usually reserved for assistant instructors. And it's a bit more than cluttered. And must you always light incense? At least pick a different scent than Olibon. It reminds me of my grandmother. I hadn't been expecting that comment, and being caught completely off guard, I stumble for words. But I'm saved from having to make up a reason by the Imperial computer assistant.
Good morning, Scipio. Would you like your usual brunch?
No thank. Yes, bring it. You need to begin taking care of yourself more now that you are going to be a diplomat, and that involves eating regularly. Despite Veterus's sounding strangely like my mother for a moment, it immediately sets me at ease, knowing that he wouldn't say that if I were being dropped from the mission. And as I see a drone descend from the ceiling with bread and sauce, I feel my appetite return. Now, do you know why you were picked to accompany the mission? I try to think of a reason that won't make me sound too egotistical. My knowledge of Khemia, especially the youth culture there? Veterus waves his paw. Oh please, Khemian youth culture. Veterus says the word with twice the emphasis and half the speed as the others. Does not matter. Besides, Carbo knew more than you. I blush even though it is a completely true and fair statement. Well, the only other reason that comes to mind might be my relationship to Neferu. And Brunus. You cultivated casual Khemian friendships with them with very little effort. Of course. I did know that forming some type of relationship with the actual Khemians we have here was important. Over the past year, I've made time to speak to them, each after our meetings, making sure to casually greet them and engage in causerie, which I knew Veterus and Amicus took notice of. While Carbo usually had his nose in a book, I was talking to real Khemians in a casual and friendly way. I wouldn't say that I know them all that well, as a few wolves that I've considered my friends over the years, but I needed some type of advantage over Carbo. I had felt bad at the time, remembering his expression of confusion and disbelief as he left the Imperial Palace after being dismissed from his current duties. But really, I know his future as a prestigious scholar is almost guaranteed, and at the very least the stresses of this mission are now over for him. Now it seems like I need to focus even more on interacting with these Khemians, and it only makes sense considering the main mission is to expand Adastra's relationship to Khemia. Where did you learn to do that, by the way? Veterus eyes me curiously as I arrange the plate amongst the scatterings of books and Khemian tech. I mean, it's not difficult. You simply... It is very difficult for a wolf. Casual friendships only create opportunity for casual betrayals. However, he glances at me from under his bushy brows. It provides opportunity for the casual gathering of intelligence as well. I feel my stomach churn again. Despite knowing that this would be part of my assignment as a diplomat, it doesn't mean that I am eager to do it. Still, the topic hadn't really come up, and with the departure date apparently nearing faster than expected, I had hoped that I would somehow be exempt. You want me to spy? I say it evenly in a way that I hope doesn't betray the hesitance and lack of confidence I feel. Amicus would simply like for you to keep an eye on them. As we know by now, Khemian bluntness is a myth. We can never be sure of their true intentions. While the feeling of friendliness that I have towards the Khemians are genuine, I remind myself that I did become their friend with the main purpose of personal gain, along with the knowledge that I would be reporting anything of importance they said. I must admit that academia is my strong point, Veterus. I'm not sure. You accepted the position of a diplomat. Thus, you accepted the responsibility to gather intelligence for your emperor. It is part of your many responsibilities now. Of course, teacher. But where do I even start? I am not trained in espionage. Shouldn't there be more time for me to train for such a thing? Don't ask me. I am simply a part-time teacher and full-time advisor to the Emperor on Khemian politics and culture. He only wanted me to prepare you mentally. It feels like a completely different discipline. Veterus waves his paw again. The reason you are not formally trained in spying is because this type of spying is merely information gathering, through individual relationships and larger networks. That makes me feel a little bit better. I see. As far as I know, the real spies who I imagine are being trained now, though again, I wouldn't know, come along once regular relationships have been established. In the meantime, this casual espionage will do, keeping your enemies close as they say, and no, I am not saying that they're enemies personally, but you understand. I think as I chew on the bread slowly, the tangy sauce reminding me of how hungry I am. Do you feel that you are up to the task? A target like Nefero should be a lucrative one. I smile. Of course, I did accept the position like you said. However, Nefero is smarter than he'd have you believe. I doubt he'll give away anything important. Oh no, that jackal's head is full of sand. Even the Emperor has publicly said so. I know that it most definitely isn't, but I suppose that's why I'm the one who's meant to spy on him. And Brunus is even more guarded. He is a trained negotiator and seasoned diplomat. Veterus laughs at me. With his informal and coarse nature, I doubt it, but remember, Nefero is the main target. Now I have to stop myself from laughing at my own mentor. Have you not considered that they are planting them so as to spy on us? That gives my teacher pause, then he shrugs. If they are, then there are some serious issues in the uppermost echelons of Khemian power. Besides, everyone knows the Pharaoh sent him here as a form of punishment. I mean, he hates his own son so much that he sets him up to live in the same place with a general from a last war. And a general that would unsurprisingly kick his balls into orbit. Ha! I sigh, feeling sorry for the jackal, like I always do when I remember that event, immortalized by drone footage.
A reminder that your meeting with the Emperor begins in approximately 10 minutes. Please be present and ready in Lecture Hall 1.
Veterus watches me as I eat the rest of the loaf of bread quickly. Also, start becoming more conscious of what you consume and consider some exercise. The jackal seems to lean towards fit body types. You're fine as you are now, but you're nearing the age where it might start to slip. That almost makes me choke, hoping my ears don't betray the embarrassment that I feel at hearing my mentor say such things about my own body. Especially considering that he was the one to insist that I eat in the first place. He called you fat. "10 minutes later, I'm in the lecture hall with Veterus, along with Amicus, Nefero, Brunus, and Virginia. These bi-weekly meetings feel very different now that my two peers are gone. Me being the youngest and the least important part of the envoy is made all the more obvious. But aside from that, business progresses as usual. It's a rather casual affair, if not a depressing one due to Adastra's lack of progress with Khemia. Not much could get done at this point unless Khemian equivalents to Amicus show up on the stretch drive and make the decisions in person. That hasn't happened in months, and while Nefero is certainly important, he isn't as important as his brother, the Vizier. So instead we discuss how wolvish society and culture should approach its various Khemian counterparts. I'm paying fairly close attention as the topic is about diplomatic language. How on Khemia one must always use words, never fists, as Khemians see the latter as a sign of weakness and lacking control. But then Amicus and Nefero argue for a while about how wolves must learn to separate diplomatic language from outright lies, which Amicus argues is the same thing. Especially as times change, our needs change, therefore some promises cannot be kept. Yes, but one unkept promise can be enough to ruin a generation, An adversary or even an ally that does not hold up their part of the bargain, no matter the change in times, is branded unreliable, and relations are unlikely to progress in any form. I find myself agreeing with Nefero, even though I would never, ever say such a thing out loud. Especially not here.
Earth Report 134 has arrived. Shall I brief you on its contents, Emperor Amicus?
Their argument interrupted, Amicus pauses, then gives a terse, "Yes," as a response, likely knowing the news would not be good. It rarely is when coming from Earth. Earth. The planet that I'd only learned about last week, after being chosen along with an ongoing efforts to integrate its humans into the Galaxias. The human who had once resided in the palace is on his own mission, trying to bring the parents' vision to fruition. I'm curious about them, but this part of the mission is not for me to know, only having been introduced to the concept so Amicus can think about and discuss it freely. So I lower my eyes as the briefing begins, yet I'm still able to feel Amicus's mood darken.
You will recall that 3 days ago, after the deaths of 3 American diplomats who came into contact with a human, it has been discovered that he is sporadically shedding aviapox virus. Unfortunately, there have been further developments in which one of the diplomats visited an establishment that serves food and beverage. 4 British officials were infected by this diplomat, and all subsequently perished in the past 2 days. The human has been placed in quarantine, and talks between nations have come to a halt, for the time being. The United States of America and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland have jointly threatened to withdraw from talks if there are further casualties. However, there appears to be no further spread of the virus at this time, likely due to the rapid onset of symptoms and, so far, 100% mortality rate in humans.
I don't understand many of the Earth words, but I understand enough. How can aviapox be so lethal to these humans? No other primates that we know of have trouble with it. And these threats to end talks of being part of the Galaxias, how frustrating that 2 states can halt an entire world from progressing. Yeah. I'm quietly relieved that the hard borders of our past are over now, at least. Amicus grumbles under his breath. How could they be so goddamn stupid? At first, I wonder if he's talking about the humans, which I find unfair. Then I realize that he might be speaking of the parents, which I find terrifying. Then he raises his voice. Do we know of any sapients that can contract aviapox and remain contagious after initial infection? No, Emperor Amicus. Ahem. I am not an expert on infectious diseases by any means, but considering how little we know of the effects of the virus on humans, anything could be possible. Yes, and due to parental negligence, he is in quarantine. I'm beginning to think that we need to bring him back, like back here, back home. Amicus almost shouts. If my fear of the parents wasn't obvious before, now it is, my eyes wide open. The parents do work in the most mysterious... By making my human appear as if he is a bioweapon? What the hell are they playing at? We witnessed it. I remember a rustle of leaves and quickly steer my mind away from what I heard on the beach. Virginia, who had been silent through most of the discussion, clears her throat. Unfortunately, Amicus, we know that the parents are not able to foresee all things. We can only fulfill our own duties on our own plane of existence. Amicus takes a deep breath, sighing loudly. I know his relationship with the human is close. Everyone knows this based on what we saw during the fight with Cato, though how close is wildly different depending on who you ask. It's clear that he's more rattled than I've ever seen him though, his paws shaking on his knees. Speaking of which, you had something to announce to our envoy before the Empire as a whole, correct? Did I? Virginia sighs. Oh, right. I'm sorry, sister. The parental catastrophe on Earth had me slightly distracted. Again, I feel an ominous cloud over us, as if the parents themselves have entered the room in disapproval. As you all know, our discussions with the Vizier and Pharaoh have stalled over the past few months. To show Khemia that Adastra is truly dedicated to an alliance... Amicus swallows as if he's having trouble getting the words out of his throat. I will also be joining the envoy despite the many hardships that it will bring our empire. I do believe the benefits will outweigh the cost. Khemia has accepted my request. Oh, so you'll be joining us? I'm surprised. Even I wouldn't have given in to Father's pompous and unreasonable demands so easily. Having Amicus with us changes the dynamics of the entire mission, and while reassuring, knowing my Emperor will be there the entire time just makes it all a bit more stressful. Talks have been stalled for 3 months, Nefero. Anyway, during this time Virginia will fill the role of acting Empress. Now my muzzle is hanging open, if only because it's the first time that I've heard such words put together. Veterus visibly blanches while Nefero and Brunus barely react at all. I quickly snap my mouth open. Thank you, my Emperor. I will perform my duties in a way that honors both the Empire and you, brother. You always do, Virginia. This means that we should all keep in mind the fact that departure could occur any day now, depending on when the ship arrives. I almost gasp and instead disguise it with a stifled cough. The last few meetings had indicated a fast approaching departure, but the possibility that it could only be days or even a day away causes my heart to pound in my chest. I calm myself, remembering that my task is rather simple, no need to be anxious. At least, all my tasks not involving Nefero anyway. Now I must be off to have a discussion with the parents once again, to make sure that we're actually still on some sort of track. It's dark by the time that we're heading out. On the way, Amicus corners me covertly to ask if I had a discussion with Veterus, which I confirm. Then the Emperor glances over at Nefero, who is leaning up against a pillar. I take the hint, and as everyone else leaves, I approach the jackal, suddenly feeling nervous. Likely because I have ulterior motives now, and that doesn't feel good. But I know that if I am to perform my role well, I shouldn't be feeling any different at all. Well, hello there, chosen one. Usually it's me that approaches you, is it not? Something catching your eye? I try to work out if that's a normal thing Nefero would say, deciding that my boldness must be causing him to act even more forward than usual. I shrug as casually as possible. Well, considering that my role is now certain, I thought that we should better acquaint ourselves. Is that so? Well, how do you think that we could best do that? The tone in Nefero's voice has its usual playful lit, but with an underlining pointedness that makes me flush just a bit under my fur. Well... I sidestep his theatrics and games for now, realizing that taking the lead is too far out of my character when interacting with Nefero. Do you have any interesting plans for tonight? Maybe you can help me better understand the Khemian way of things? That would be rather difficult to do here in Adastra. But as for plans, not particularly. Hey, ready to go, Neff? Oh, hey there, Skip. Hello, Brunus. I am at least able to avoid wincing now whenever they use the pet name for Scipio, one usually reserved for pups. That depends, Brunus. Firstly, I was meaning to ask Skip if he would like to visit a den with me. I blink. That's not exactly something that you say loudly in such a quiet and hollow, echoing room. I had been on the verge of simply asking if I could join the two of them to make my attempt to fill my new role less conspicuous. It's also something that he's never asked me despite his notoriously promiscuous reputation. Is it because I am now guaranteed? Would he have asked the same of Carbo? Imagining that bookish wolf in this situation is, well, it's unimaginable. I can at least say that I'm experienced visiting a den with a partner. Well, alright then. Have fun, you two. The giant creature doesn't wait for my response before turning and heading out, leaving me alone with Nefero and the empty university. He's still waiting on an answer. Back during my university days, if I became friendly with another attractive wolf, male or female, we would usually make a stop at the tavern or entertainment venues before possibly ending up in a den. It was a weekly occurrence during my first few years attending the school, and yet my heart flutters like I'm 10 years younger, about to experience a den for the first time. Yes, I'd like to. Wonderful. I feel embarrassingly warm at the idea of a Khemian finding me attractive enough to bring me to a den, and I quickly remind myself of my mission. Whether or not I find the jackal charming or attractive matters not. I have a job to do. Nefero offers me his arm as if escorting me. There is an establishment in the Clay District that we can go to. Ah, the Clay District? The surprise and hesitation in my voice is obvious. Sorry, would you rather go somewhere else? It's simply somewhat close by. But I don't want to make you uncomfortable if you have a problem with that place. Well, it's more that that place has a problem with me. They're not fond of the elite. I say it with some feigned exasperation, not really feeling elite in any way, but I raise a paw to my mane, flipping the fur there casually. Oh, yes. Apologies for not remembering. Maybe we can catch up to Brute. Sensing Nefero pulling back from the initial offer, I place a paw on his proffered arm. It has been a while since any so-called elite has been attacked in the streets. Besides, I'm curious as to what it might be like, considering that you want to go. I give Nefero the chance to explain, but he simply smiles at me. I'll keep you safe, either way. The jackal keeps my arm around his the entire time, and I speculate that it's some sort of Khemian ritual before sexual intercourse, and I begin taking mental notes. Meanwhile, I enjoy the feel of his thick bicep flexing slightly under the incredibly short fur, practically just a black velvet covering his defined muscles. I quickly forget about the other, possible hostile pedestrians as we get closer to the dens. They're not looking at me anyway. I'm annoyed at myself for still feeling nervous, and also feeling a bit taken by this jackal. The entrance is a shabby side door where Nefero signs in and pays, ignoring the stairs with ease, and I find myself becoming a bit annoyed with the other wolves breaking den etiquette just because he is a Khemian. I suppose I shouldn't expect anything different from those in the Clay District. Then we're led down a narrow hall and into the room Nefero rented. The lights are dimmed low, and Nefero fumbles with the switch while I go to sit on the bed. As the artificial compluvium above us glows more brightly, I can tell it's one of the most expensive rooms in the establishment. It's still a bit cramped, slightly tacky, but pleasant and far more luxurious than any den room that I've been in. I wonder if the lidded expansive ceiling is what Nefero comes here for, considering how large and convincing it is, despite the room being completely closed off from the outside. Still, dens are mainly frequented by students on their third warning for fornicating on campus. I still live on campus, and so I technically still must follow those rules, but I know Nefero lives in the Imperial District where he likely lives in a fairly nice place. And, if there were a reason Nefero didn't want to go to his living quarters, there are, I assume, higher quality dens in that district. But Nefero is paying, and I'm not about to be rude and question him now. I assume you're familiar with this type of place? I glance at him, and he smiles toothily. I realize then how brazenly he's poised himself, having already dropped his Khemian garb, now in just his underwear. I know that his undergarments are wolven, likely having had to make the switch after being here for over 3 years now. Swallowing hard, I stare, taking all of it in, feeling more nervous by the second. Sexual intercourse of any kind is forbidden on the grounds of Avaro's universities, so yes, I've been to a few. Nefero rolls his eyes, grabbing a bottle of the complimentary wine. And so is masturbation, I've heard. And here I thought wolves were sexually liberated. Well, we are. It just happens to be the leading university on the moon, and the philosophy of the school does not include carnal thoughts. I find myself talking too much and trail off as Nefero leans casually against the armrest, drinking straight from the bottle. I attended the best university in the Galaxias, and there were rooms dedicated to the act on campus. I bristle just slightly at the dig at my school, even if it's true that most every famous school on Khemia is superior. After that comment, though, I decide to try out some Khemian bluntness about to ask why he's brought me here instead of his own place. Either way, why come to a den when... but then he walks up to me, right up close to me, to the point that I feel my nose is going to bump the mound of his undergarments. Anyway, to celebrate your promotion, I thought that I'd help you with your research on Khemians. Have you ever copulated with one? My throat is suddenly very dry as I shake my head, even though I know that he knows the answer to that. Well? The jackal stands up straighter, putting his physique on display. Just as I felt earlier, I see his fur is much shorter compared to mine, giving him the advantage of being able to show off the muscles on his chest and stomach. He then grabs his undergarments and slides them down. The jackal is moving boldly in a way that makes me wonder if he's trying to make it less strange for me, seeing Khemian anatomy in person for the first time. Although I know what to expect, I'm still left staring in fascination. While very different from my own, it fits well on his frame, and as he moves closer, I find myself reaching out, sliding my paws up his thighs, then back around to cup his rear. This is the moment that my hesitation drops, and I pull the jackal in close, kissing his bare privates and abdomen, making him gasp. It is a long session of sorts, though not very much happens, as Nefero seems to simply enjoy touching me. At first, I'm a bit confused, unsure if it's some type of foreplay, but then I realize that he's encouraging me to explore and touch back, and at some point we simply end up entangled together, lying there. His arms are around me tightly, and I can smell the wine on his breath. Maybe it's a bit rude, but all of this makes me genuinely wonder if he's lonely. As our movements ease to stillness, I reach back to rest a paw on his shoulder, just in case he needs reassurance, then I slowly fall asleep. I wake up, and what happens in the following moment is something that my mind is never able to fully process. The door to our den is open, and I wonder why because it should have been locked. Is Neferu? As I reach for my glasses, I realize that he's sleeping next to me, but that's when a large dark figure stands up beside our bed. A wolf who I don't know, his scent simply telling me that he is a stranger and a male. There is something in his paw, and for a moment I try to yell, but nothing happens. The dark blocky shape of his head turns in my direction, noticing me awake, and my insides turn to water. He moves, but then there is a harsh ear-splitting crack. Before my eyes, I see the man, the sapient, bend and warp in the shape of a wave before blasting apart. I'm splattered by wetness, by smells and feelings that I haven't felt since. A light goes on, floating around us, displaying the horror. What the hell happened, Calm? Nefero is moving around beside me, but I can't move. I smell this person all over me. I'm covered in him, tasting his blood, viscera, and more in my muzzle.
An assassination was attempted on the lives of Nefero and Scipio. Separatist connections are suspected. Amicus has been notified.
The drone's small, built-in speaker makes Calm's voice sound harsh, and as its lights turn to illuminate the wall, I see everything. No. No. No.
Target fully neutralized. Bodily state is incompatible with life.
No. 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 Skip? I grasp at my mane. I feel them pulling at it. They're gonna pull me out onto the street. What? Nefero finally focuses on me after fumbling around for the lights. I need to... I can't breathe. I roll off the bed, feeling the blood and the soft, fleshy masses in my fur as I try to crawl under the bed, but I find no space. Then I crawl behind the sofa, still covering my mane, avoiding the blood in the streets, avoiding the men with bricks torn from the university. I avoid looking at one of my old professors in rhetoric as he gets his head smashed in with one of those bricks, the men taunting him, asking him if his fancy words can save him now. I cover my eyes, waiting. Someone, Nefero, touches my shoulder. It's like I'm in two times and places at once, but the touch, it begins to ground me. Still, I cover my mane and tremble until I'm finally able to bring the present back to focus, one that's not much better than the past. I look up and see Nefero staring at me. He's seen it. He sees what's wrong with me. I'm certain that I'm not going to Khemia anymore. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So, we were reintroduced to these characters, and I say reintroduced because, again, this is like the third time that this visual novel has been released. So, we were introduced to Scipio, who was the main character, he's a little nerdy. He's a little, well, he's a nerd. Um, and as you can see, he was picked specifically because he, I guess, cultivated a relationship with the Khemians, whereas his peers really were more like, oh, we know about Khemia, but we don't really talk to the actual Khemians that we have currently in the planet. And if we do, we're very academic about it. So it was natural for Amicus and Veterus to pick Scipio, even though he was probably not the best choice, at least in how prepared he was to be in the planet of Khemia. We were reintroduced again to Nefero, who, if you read Adastra or even know anything about Adastra, you know that he is a bit of he's a hoe. Sylvetrus saying those things is not completely untrue, but at the very least, he could have been. We also know that he's not exactly. He's using it to compensate. So we probably will be delving more into that in this visual novel about why Nefero is the way he is, and why people usually consider the fact that he was on Adastra, which was basically the most dangerous planet for a Khemian to be. Well, not even planet, Adastra's a moon. And not somewhere else. And it's probably because of punishment. What else? We also got we got more glimpses into something that happened in the previous visual novel Adastra, which is the Cato riots. So, in case you don't know, if you haven't read or seen anything of Adastra yet, the Cato riots occurred when Marco the Human convinces Virginia, Cass, Nefero to basically depose Cato, who had himself deposed Amicus, violently deposed him and put him in jail. And basically they were going to do this whole thing where they were going to basically reveal that Cato was illegitimate and Cassius was going to abdicate the throne and he's going to give it, to Amicus, the rightful ruler of Adastra. But unfortunately, Cassius's little pet, Alexios, leaked this information to Cato because that was kind of his job, Alexios' job, to sow chaos on Adastra, which is a whole other thing that's happening. And that causes Cato to come back unexpectedly. He poisons Cassius. He is basically gonna marry by force Virginia, who is the only actual other royal, and to legitimize his rule. And then he's gonna execute Nefero and then probably Amicus later. And it is at that point where Marco comes out and then, he saves the day by sacrificing himself. But at the same time, though, we have the Cato riots, which are riots that are happening throughout Adastra, where people that are loyal or that believe in what Cato wants, which is, basically total domination of the galaxy, even though they're one of the lesser siblings at Astra. And they break into the universities, they attack people, they kill people, and a whole bunch of bad things are happening around the moon. Because again, Adastra is a moon. And yeah, so Scipio witnessed firsthand what these things that were happening. And he has PTSD because of that. And that is going to be something that Nefero and Scipio, I guess you could say, bond over. But it is something that is deeply ingrained in Scipio. And we will go into more detail about that later. Like I said, certain aspects of what Cameron Wilson went through in Arches were supposed to be present in this visual novel first, or actually they were supposed to be from this visual novel, and they ended up in Arches. So again, that's the whole revision thing for Khemia. But you can still sense certain little things here and there that are very similar, or that are just sort of similar now. PTSD being one of them. And what it does to you, what it does to your brain, and things like that. And even like little throwaway lines like at the beginning where somebody is talking about Scipio when he's meditating, like at the very beginning of the visual novel, you hear that, oh, he's a little different, like he's a little bit messed up, I guess, for lack of a better word. And that's because of what happened. And because, PTSD does that to you. It kind of rewires your brain a little differently. And yeah, Anyway, so yeah, that is the first part of the newest revision update for Khemia. And write down in the comments what you think and what you expect, and if you've read Adastra, or if you read the previous version, like, what are your thoughts, etc., etc. What are you hoping for this visual novel? This is the second one in what is technically, or was technically, supposed to be a trilogy, where it's Adastra, the human with Amicus, and then the human leaves, and then Khemia, which is about Nefero Scipio, and then the third one, which would be about when the human is able to come back to Adastra and, rejoin with Amicus. And a lot of the things have, some of the things that have changed are like the sprites. A lot of people were like, oh, cool, and some were a little like, oh, you don't look like I remember. But technically speaking, within the timeline of the story, it has been a while, so some characters could change. And I believe Amicus was like in his late 20s. So like, I think it's been 5 years, so he would be like in his 30s now. So yeah. Anywho, so yeah, comments, and thank you all for watching/listening. If you would like to play Khemia yourself, you can do so by going down into the link in the description, which should have a direct link for the itch.io page where you can download the game and play it yourself, or you can just go to itch.io.com and search for it. And if you would like to support the Echo Project, you can do so by going down into the link in the description, which have a direct link for the Patreon page where you can subscribe and, get early access to builds of Khemia and all the other visual novels that they're doing. And, my throne, my Ko-fi, and other stuff is down in the description as well as the link, just reminding people for, trying to remember his name. I think his name is Marrow. He's also a hyena who has a really long video about Adastra, where he's basically gonna recount the entirety of the story in case you don't want to read Adastra. Because trust me, if I were to upload my old read-through of Adastra, which is the first thing that I ever did for YouTube related to visual novels, it will be terrible. It is nothing like what I have now. But yeah, so all that will be in the, description. But yeah, so I guess I'll see you guys in the next part. Bye-bye.